Hey everyone, this is Carbonite, and I am finally going to be bringing you an update to my Maelstrom for standard deck post Festival Booster 2023. So I guess I can just kind of start with how I feel about Maelstrom going into this format. I do think Maelstrom has some potential, but I will say the skill ceiling for playing Maelstrom correctly is actually very, very high. It does have a lot of potential good matchups. Theoretically, it goes good into Gandiva because you can actually clear your board, leave them nothing to retire, draw a whole bunch of cards, kind of just like meet them blow for a blow. But that really depends on your ability to play the deck almost perfectly and your ability to just draw into what you need at the right time and to actually just keep up tempo, because unlike Gandiva, Maelstrom is a deck that requires you to do everything correctly and to know exactly what you're doing and to basically be able to make the correct plays every single time, or you will just fold to like all these better decks that have just much lower skill ceilings. So let's go ahead and get into the deck profile itself. So we are still opting to play the Maelstrom ride line. I just think it is the superior ride line. It gives you so much advantage. It kind of just helps you do what the deck is trying to do, which I don't think you can really get out of. I know some people like trying to play the Tidal Assault build with the Tidal Assault in the ride deck and then with the grade 1 from Zorga to just kind of dig deeper. I suppose that does have some benefits, but I find myself not really thinking that that is the correct play. But I guess let's go, since this is a new deck profile, we'll go ahead and go over the ride line just quickly. So Eric is just your standard D starter, and then we have Theo, which is when he's rode upon by an Aquaforce. You search your deck for a Blue Storm Armada card. Currently we still only have one because Maelstrom hasn't really gotten any support since, outside of just generic stuff. And then his second skill is that he is a 13k attacker while you have a Maelstrom Vanguard. So that 13k attacker I think is actually very relevant most of the time. I believe I have a video where I talk about this a little bit more. But getting into Algos, when he's rode upon by only Aquaforce, you check the top 7 cards of your deck, you choose a unit card with only Aquaforce or Tear Dragon, and then you call it to regard and shuffle your deck. And then it has this other skill where if it attacks this 4th battle or more this turn, you grade 3 your Vanguard with Maelstrom, it gets 5k, and then on hit draw, which is a skill that's never really going to come up because you never really want Algos to be on board, and it kind of just conflicts with the fact that Maelstrom calls it out from Soul because it has to be the first attack in order to restand, and that would mean you'd have to have something else to attack multiple times. So most of the time we're just using Algos for that first skill, but it is there in case you are in a pinch and you actually have a situation where you want to use it, which is very rare. I wouldn't go out of my way to actually use it. And then we do have Maelstrom himself, which is an act once per turn. You choose a card from your soul that only has Aquaforce or is a Tear Dragon, and then it gets the skill that when it attacks a grade 3 or when it attacks and your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, you can counterblast 1 and stand it, and then at the end of the turn it goes back into the soul. Most of the time it's going to be putting itself into the soul with its own skill, but do remember that anything you call out from the soul with this, whether it's Theo, it probably won't be Algos, but it's probably going to be an Inlet, it's going to go into the soul anyway, so that is one of our ways to just clear our board and to kind of counterplay against Gandiva. And then it has the second skill, which is when it attacks a Vanguard, if it's 4th battle that turn or more, you have to draw a card, and then you choose one of your opponent's Vanguards and retire it. So both those skills are non-optional. If you do make Maelstrom the 4th or more attack, you are going to automatically have to draw a card, and you are forced to retire something. So you don't have a choice in that situation. Most of the time, it's not really going to matter, but if you do get into a point where you're getting close to deck out, which this deck can grind fairly well, and it does draw enough cards to kind of sustain itself. So if you do get to that point, make sure you're not letting Maelstrom be the 4th attack so you don't get that mandatory draw. Alright, so getting into the main deck, we are obviously playing the other 3 copies of Persona Ride. Persona Ride is very essential for the deck to see. If you ever see it in your opening hand, you always keep it. You want to try and dig for this, your Persona Rides as much as possible, because without Persona Ride, you really don't have that much kill power. Honestly, Persona Ride is the only way that Maelstrom can realistically actually kill an opponent, and without it, a lot of your skills are kind of just turned off, and your attacks just turn in from actually threatening to just tiny little pokes that are costing your opponent 1 card to guard, which can definitely be something good, but the more power you have, the more cards you're getting out of your opponent's hand. So seeing Persona Ride is essential to playing the deck, and one of the things that is really holding it back, because if you don't actually see that Persona Ride, a lot of the times you are just really struggling to close out the match. Alright, so continuing on with our grade 3s, we do have the most important grade 3 in the deck, which is obviously going to be that Inlet Pulse Dragon. So in case you don't know, I guess we'll just quickly go over the skill, but probably everyone knows Inlet Pulse by now. So as this first skill that only acts when you activates when you are on Flagbird, but the main skill where you're looking for is that second one, which is at the end of turn. If the number of attacks you have this turn is 4 or more, you put it into Soul and you draw a card. You're almost always going to be able to get that 4 attacks. Maelstrom himself just allows you to get those 4 attacks as long as you have the 1 counter blast. You can just call anything out of the soul. Usually it's going to be Inlet Pulse Dragon, attack 1, 2, and then as long as you have another thing to attack with, that's going to be 3, and then Vanguard is going to be 4, so you can get the draw. And the end phase, you put in all your inlets and draw cards for each one. The one issue I do have with Inlet Pulse Dragon is that he is a dead draw if you draw this during the end phase. If you draw this off Maelstrom skill, it is a dead card in your hand and it does not do anything until you're able to survive and call it down to the board next turn. So essentially, if you ever run into a situation where you have inlets in hand, you always call them down to board because you would rather exchange them for any better card, even if it's just a trigger, because that is at least shield value, whereas this card is not. Alright, so next up we do actually have some new cards from the Festival Booster. We're playing the 1 copy of Florence. So this is a new card, so we'll go ahead and go over it. So the first skill is Continuous. If your opponent's drive check or damage check revealed the trigger unit, this unit gets plus 10k power and plus 10k shield. So essentially what that is it nullifies your opponent's triggers. So if you have this in hand and you have enough to guard, but if they get 1 trigger, you would need 10k more. This card is your extra 10k. If your opponent hits a defensive, this card hits over a defensive. But that is one of the main reasons we're playing, because it's a very good attacker. But we are also playing because of the second skill, which is when it attacks, you can discard the top 2 cards of your deck and perform the following. Or you perform all the following. So you soul charge 1, and this unit gets plus 5k. But if all the cards discarded for this cost are not normal units, so if you mill an order and a trigger, or 2 triggers, or 2 orders, I suppose, it gets plus 15k instead of just 5k. So it becomes a 28 as opposed to an 18. And then you also has this other skill, which you can activate both of these at the same time, which is remove a over trigger from your drop zone, and then you choose a unit card from your drop and add it to your hand. So with that second skill, you can theoretically add things like Persona Ride, you can add PGs, you can add triggers back, but I don't know why you would do that. You can add back, probably not Inlet Pulse, because you can probably have a way to cycle them out all the way, but essentially anything you need, you can just get it off from there. And then obviously comboing with that, another new card from Festival Booster. The main reason why we are playing this is because of this, the Forbiddal Surrogate, which is a Regalius piece. So you can only play 1 Regalius piece in your deck, and you can only use it a total of once per fight. So even if you were to add it back to your hand, you can't actually activate it again. So this one allows you to search for a total of up to 2 grade 3 or 4 cards with different card names and reveal them. You call all the revealed grade 3 cards to rear guard, and if you reveal grade 4, it gets added to your hand, and then you shuffle your deck. So the main reason we're playing the 1 copy of Florence is because outside of Inlet Pulse Dragon, the only other target would be the Maelstrom itself, and honestly, we need to keep as many Persona Rides in deck as possible. If we're desperate for it, we can definitely do it, but I think having a search target is at least good. The only way this is going to not get you 2 is if this hits the damage zone and you aren't able to heal it out, because this can actually call from drop as well. So this doubles as both your 5th copy of Inlet, because Inlet is super essential for the deck, and it is also technically revival in case you need to get some more inlets back. I will say this card does conflict a little bit with the main order of the deck, the Judgment of the Storm, but for the most part, it does very similar things, I will say, which is revive an Inlet Pulse that you discarded for Ride deck, and I think that sometimes playing this as soon as you get it is perfectly fine, and it does a very good job. So right now I am liking this a little bit more than the Persona Ride order, even though I do think Persona Ride is definitely valid. If you want to play the Persona Ride order, I'll tell you later what I think you should replace the Florence with. Alright, so rounding out the grade 3 cards is going to be our 3 copies of Judgment of the Storm, which is the order card that you can only search out, or the only order card you can search out with Theo, which is a set order. So you play if you have a Maelstrom Vanguard, and then when it is put into the order zone, you activate all the effects below. So you choose either an Aqua Force or a Tear Dragon from a drop, call it to rearguard, so just built-in revival. And then if you play a second one, you give one of your units 5k. And then if you play the third one, while you have the other 2 in the order zone, you give it a 10k instead of just a 5k. So this kind of just scales a little bit. It's not too great of a card, but it is really nice to have that revival, just so that you can discard your pieces. If your pieces die or something happens to them, you can always just get them back. Or if you just discard them off right deck or heal them out of your damage zone, it's nice to have that access to your drop zone. The extra utility that this card brings you is very good. I think in my last deck profile, I wasn't really playing too many copies because I found it to be not as good, but I have definitely shined up a little bit more to this card. I think it is very good. It is a dead card in your hand. It's no shield value, but being able to play one every single turn is actually pretty good. And then as you get closer and closer into the late game, this card is definitely very helpful for at least helping you hit better numbers. Alright, so moving on into the grade 2s, we do have the, once again, 4 copies of Tidal Assault. So I've started to realize that this card is really not as good as I think it is, but before we do that, let's go ahead and quickly just go over his skill because it has been a little bit while. So when he attacks, you can Soul Blast 1, choose your Vanguards, it Maelstrom, it gets an extra 5k. That's not a once per turn, so you can use this every single time he attacks. And then at the end of the battle that it attacks anything, if it's the second battle that turn, you can Counter Blast 1, and stand it, but it does you do have to have a standing Maelstrom Vanguard, so you can't swing Vanguard first, which you're probably never going to be doing, but just do note that in case you ever do that. But honestly, Tidal Assault is here because we need Aqua Force, and this is an Aqua Force, meaning we can get it off of the Algos. We can also get it off the Judgment Maelstrom, and this is another card that helps us enable our 4 attacks. So the reason I'm not too big on this card is because it is just a 10k attacker. Unless you play your second Judgment Maelstrom and revive and give it an extra 5k, it's not really doing that much work, especially if you're going second and your opponent is already on grade 3, and most of the time they'll either intercept with their grade 2 rear guards that can actually be hit by Tidal. So a lot of the time, Tidal Assault is just swinging into nothing. So I really am thinking that as much as I want to cut this card to maybe 3 or 2, I think that just having that Aqua Force makes the consistency just that much better. So he's going to be sticking around because he does enable a lot more of attacks. And then once you do hit that Persona Ride, he is actually able to hit for a lot better numbers. And in combo with another card, it does really help him out. But Tidal Assault really needs a lot of help, and I would say don't prioritize using Tidal Assault unless you need to, and maybe don't always use that Soul Blast skill as much as I think I used to in the past, because there are a lot of better things that you can be using the Soul for, and honestly nowadays that Soul usage is competing for a lot of things, so maybe don't always use the Tidal Assault first skill. Alright, so next up we have another new addition. I've actually had this in the deck since it came out, but I obviously didn't make a deck profile back then, which is the 3 copies of Tideline. So it has one skill, which is if you Persona Ride this turn, you Soul Blast 1, choose one of your other units. That unit and this unit gets plus 10k until the end of the turn. So 3 copies of this deck is a Tear Drag, which means it can be revived. It can be called off of the Algos. So very good utility there. But what this card mainly is there for is to be your finisher. It does feel a little bit bad not playing the 4 copies of Persona Ride in the deck with this card, but I feel that just having this card and being able to use it on those Persona Ride turns gives you such a big strong tempo swing that it's really essential at this time. This is your closest thing to a finisher, and if you do actually want to opt for more Tidelines, I would recommend you go for the Chalice Regalis piece instead of this, and then bump up Tideline to 4 copies instead of the Florence. But I do kind of like the utility that this combo has, basically just making it that much harder for you to miss the Inlet Pulse. But definitely at least play some copies of Tideline, because this is your best chance of actually closing out the game. Alright, so getting into the grade 1s, we do still have the 4 copies of the Wheel Assault. So let's go ahead and go over Wheel Assault skills. So he is just at the end of the battle, he boosts if you have a Vanguard with Maelstrom in its card name. You can Soul Blast 1, choose 2 of your guards, and you just swap their positions. So playing the Wheel Assault at 4 mainly because just like with Tidal Assault, it is an Aqua Force. It's another call target off of Algos. It's another call target off of Judgment of the Storm. And you do want to be having those as many call targets as possible because you really do want to get as much advantage out of your cards as possible because you are a little bit lower tier deck. So I think playing it at 4 is fine. I have noticed that it sometimes you sometimes draw into multiple Wheel Assaults and then you don't really want them anymore, but that's why I usually am not too conservative with them. I kind of just call them down early and kind of swing early because having an early game this meta is very, very essential. And continuing with that idea of early gaming is the 3 copies of the Prize Trident. So Prize Trident is a very old card from BT3, which is when your other unit attacks, if it is a 5th battle turn or more, put in Soul and countercharge 1. So he does amass you Soul, he gets you countercharge. He is our only form of really countercharge in the deck, and he is very, very good for those grindy matchups. So do note that in order to actually get this skill off, you do kind of need to commit you don't need to commit to Counterblast if you have the Wheel Assault, but a lot of the times you have to be very careful with this card because you need to remember when to boost with it and when to actually use it up, because the timing can be a little bit awkward on this guy because sometimes the 5th attack is the attack that he could be boosting, the 2nd attack that he would be boosting for like an Inlet Pulse. So you do need to keep that in mind if you are using him, and you need to really think about your attack patterns and decide when to use him. But I really like this card now. I don't think I concluded in my last deck profile. I like him for 1, he is an early game card and lets you rush and aggro early, which lets you get your opponent to very high damage, which lets you finish it out. And 2, because he kind of gives you that sustainability. If you don't play this, you have no way of countercharging, and if you're using 2 counterblasts every single turn, that gives you about 2 turns of actually being able to do things, not to mention like any other skills you would want to activate. Although I don't think we have any other counterblasts other than the Maelstrom and the Tidal Assault, so it doesn't get that bad. But actually, honestly, him being a Soul card is also pretty good because we do use a bit more Soul than counterblast in the deck. Alright, so just finishing off the basic stuff, we've got the 4 PGs, obviously playing the Elementario because Chronojet is still a deck after all this time. Trigger lineup has stayed pretty much the same. We're going for the 8 crit, and okay, 4 of them are actually going to be this guy, who is a Tear Dragon, which I do recommend you play this one over like even the SP copies one if you want to max rarity the deck, just because I think having that extra Tear Dragon there in the worst case scenario is better than not having it. I'd rather get a 5k booster and deck thin, even if it is a critical trigger, than get absolutely nothing off of the top 7 algos, which does happen very, very rarely. But you know, I'd rather have it there than not. We do also have, we're playing the 4 draws. I have been considering opting to go for front, mostly for the shield value, and the main reason I'm not going for it is because a lot of the times your front row rear guards are rested by the time the Vanguard attacks. So a lot of the times it's just going to be giving 10k to the Vanguard and another unit. But I have also considered the fact that as a defensive trigger, it does protect your rear guards from being attacked into. But there is definitely an argument for fronts, I feel now. But I'm still opting for draws because we do need to see our pieces, even though we do have a lot of draw power in the deck. A lot of our draw power is contingent on seeing those pieces in the first place. And then of course we are doing the 4 heals, not playing any crit heals right now, but Gandiva is a thing. Theoretically, Messiah is a thing, and you could play crit heals, you could play double attack heals if you're scared of Willista now, but I'm still going to be opting to stick with the basic trigger lineup for now. And of course, we do have just Stoicheia OT. Now, we do actually have something to talk about because Festival Booster did introduce 2 new over triggers. So we have to kind of talk about why we're choosing Stoicheia over the others. So Stoicheia is just generically good. It's always going to be good. Almost every situation you check the Stoicheia over trigger, it is good. Why we're not playing the blue one is because I don't think it's really good. You draw a card and then you give a crit, which basically means it is just kind of a worse Stoicheia OT. So I don't think if you're ever playing a Stoicheia deck, you would choose the blue OT over the Stoicheia one, but the red OT is another matter because it does actually let you give one of your standing rear guards the ability to swing twice, which in this deck is theoretically pretty decent, but I think it kind of conflicts with some of the attack patterns we do in the deck, because although we do have an attack pattern where we have 2 more attacks after the Vanguard's 4th attack, I don't think that unless you're in that situation, it does kind of end up being a bit of a dead card, because if you hit it in a lot of situations, it doesn't do very much, and there is no way to be like super cheeky and combo with it, because Tidal Assault can't work with it because the Vanguard has to be standing in order for Tidal Assault to actually use its skill to restand. So you can't even go swing Vanguard, check red OT, let Tidal stand on the 2nd swing, and then use his own skill to restand him with 100 million, and then have him attack again, and then use a red OT skill to stand him again. And then the card you call out from Maelstrom stands on the 1st battle, so there's no chance for you to really check OT unless you swing Vanguard 2nd, and then that one can attack another one. So it's just really awkward with the red OT, so I think Stoicheia is still just best for now. Alright, so I did do a test hand in the last video, so if you do want to see a test hand, go ahead and check that one out. But what I'm going to be kind of just showing here is what your ideal kind of turn looks like, your kill turn. So obviously we do want to start off with a Persona Ride, we draw our card, and then your ideal board setup does include this card if you need inlets. You prefer to play that on your first grade 3 turn, but your ideal turn does kind of look like this, not calling that, actually having that in Soul. And then calling this. So we would need 2 counterblasts in order to actually use all of our skills this turn. So what we do is just discard a card, call out the Inlet Pulse Dragon. And then, of course, since we did Persona Ride, we want to use the Tideline skill to Soul Blast 1 and get 10k here. Ideally, we would have the Judgment Maelstrom, and we would actually be able to revive one of these cards and have it be our 2nd one, so we can give Tidal Assault an extra 5k, so that he is hitting for now 35 with the Tideline's extra boost. So what we would want to do is swing for 23, Carameless 1, stand him, 2nd attack, swing for 35, remember the Tideline, and then hopefully calling him off of the Judgment of the Storm to swing 35. Probably not using the skill because we have enough power, although if we're really trying to close it out and we have the excess soul, we can definitely do that. But 2nd battle, restand him, go 3rd battle, swing the Inlet Pulse for 23, and then 4th battle, swing the Maelstrom, draw a card, and then obviously swing for 31. In this situation, that 36 doesn't really matter that much, because most of the time they're going to be PGing the Vanguard when it gets this big. We're going to do our drive checks, whatever it is. We are just going to be going into the next turn, swinging the Tidal Assault, once again putting the Trident in the Soul, countercharging for next turn, swinging for 35, 43, and then obviously using the Wheel Assault skill to Soul Blast 1, and then moving the Tideline up and swinging for that final 30. And then, of course, during the end phase, we put in Inlet Pulse Dragon and draw another card. Alright, so that is going to do it for my updated Maelstrom deck profile. I hope you guys enjoyed. Don't forget to do all those YouTube things, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.